The moment her boot touched Texas dirt, Evelyn Carter's knees buckled, and she caught herself before any man could see her fall. Dried blood crusted beneath the brim of her bonnet. Her fingers shook white around the single bag that held everything left to her in this world. Across the street, a tall rancher watched her the way a doctor watches a wound that won't close. "Darlin," he said low and slow, "I don't bite unless I must." She didn't believe him. She'd quit believing men a long time ago. If you're watching, subscribe, follow this story clear to the end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from so I can see how far Evelyn's journey has traveled. She had counted the stops, 14 days on rails and roads, and at every one of them she had counted the men who watched her too long, the way you'd count wolves at the edge of firelight. This one made 15. He was standing by the freight office when the stagecoach groaned to a halt, and he did not move toward her the way the others always did, fast, hungry, certain of their right to her. He just looked, hat pushed back, thumbs hooked in his belt. And when the driver flung her trunk down into the dust like it was somebody's coffin, the tall man didn't flinch, but she saw his jaw tighten, and she thought, there it is. That's the anger. I know that anger, it always comes. You'd be Miss Carter. It wasn't a question. She hated that it wasn't a question. I would. Colt Maddox. He touched the brim of his hat and did not offer his hand, and she was so grateful for that small mercy that her eyes stung, and she despised herself for it. You had a hard road. I had a road. Longer than you're saying. She lifted her chin, the bonnet shifted. She felt the cool air find the swollen place along her cheekbone, and she watched his eyes go there and stay there, and she waited for what men said next. He said nothing. That was the first thing that frightened her about him. Not the size of him, though. He was built like a man who'd wrestled the land itself and won more often than lost. Not his voice. It was the silence. Every man she had ever known filled silence like it was a debt to be paid. Her father filled it with commands. Her intended filled it with promises that curdled into threats. Colt Maddox simply stood in the silence like it belonged to him and let her stand in it too. "There's a boarding house," he said finally. "Widow Pearl runs it. Clean beds. She'll have supper on." Evelyn's grip tightened on the bag. "I understood we would be married today." "We could be." "Then let's be." He studied her, and she made herself hold his gaze, made herself not look away, because looking away was what prey did, and she was done being prey, or she was trying to be done, and there was a great and terrible difference between the two. "No," Colt said. The word landed in her chest like a dropped stone. "No, not today." And now the fear came all the way up, cold and familiar, because no from a man was never really no. It was the front porch of a bargain. It was the price going up. She had been sold once already. She knew the shape of it. "If the arrangement doesn't suit you," she said, and heard her own voice go thin and careful. The voice she used to survive. "I'll not hold you to it. I can find." "Miss Carter." He said it gentle, and gentle was the most dangerous word she knew. "You've got a mark on your face somebody put there. You've got a hand you can't hardly open the way you're keeping it in your sleeve. And you got off that coach looking behind you before you looked in front. A man who'd marry a woman in that condition inside of an hour is a man taking something. I'm not going to be one more man that took something from you." She could not have been more stunned if he'd struck her. For a moment, she couldn't speak at all. 14 days, 15 men, her whole life stacked up behind her like cordwood, and not one of them had ever once said a thing like that. "You don't know me," she managed. "No, ma'am, I surely don't." He bent and hoisted her trunk onto one shoulder like it weighed nothing, and the ease of that strength should have terrified her, and somehow it didn't. "But I know that look. Buried 3 neighbors' wives that had it before the fever ever touched them. So supper first, bed second, and tomorrow, if you still want to, we'll go see Judge Morrison." He started up the street. Then he stopped, turned back, and something almost like a smile ghosted across his weathered face. "And if you don't want to, you get your ticket money back, and I never darken your door again." "That's the whole deal, darling. I don't bite." The smile went, "Unless I must." He walked on, and Evelyn Carter stood alone in the middle of Dust River, Texas, with the whole town pretending not to watch her, and she thought, this is a trick. This is the cruelest trick yet, and when it turns, I will have farther to fall than ever. Then she followed him, because what else was there? Widow Pearl took one look at Evelyn's face and set her mouth in a hard line and asked no questions. And that was the second mercy of the day, and Evelyn was learning to count mercies the way she'd learned to count wolves. He paid your board through the week, Pearl said, ladling stew. Colt did. Said a woman shouldn't feel she owed a soul for a roof. He said that. He did eat. Evelyn ate. She was ashamed of how much she ate. She hadn't been permitted to eat before speaking at her father's table since she was 12 years old. And now here was a whole bowl and a second one pressed on her and a hunk of bread, and she ate like an animal and could not stop, and Pearl just refilled the coffee and looked studiously at the wall. He's not what I expected, Evelyn said when the shaking in her hands had eased a little. What did you expect? A man who'd want his money's worth. Pearl snorted. You'll wait a long while for Colt to want anything out loud. Man buried a whole life's worth of wanting 6 years back and never dug it up again. Evelyn set down her spoon. He was married. Sarah. Pearl said the name careful, the way you carry something cracked. And a boy on the way. Lost them both in one bad night, and the doctor 40 miles off, and the river up so he couldn't cross. She wiped the counter that did not need wiping. Man like that, honey, he don't advertise for a wife, 'cause he's lonesome for a warm body. He advertised 'cause a ranch is a lot of quiet for one soul, and 'cause maybe. She stopped herself. Well, ain't it my business what maybe? The bell over the door jangled. Evelyn was up and against the far wall before she knew she'd moved her back to the plaster. The bread knife somehow already in her fist, and she didn't remember taking it. Her body had taken it. Her body knew things. Her mind was too tired to know. But it was only a boy. A telegraph boy, red-cheeked, clutching a slip of paper. Message for the depot to post, he panted. Man wired ahead. Said to spread it wide. Pearl took the slip. Read it. And Evelyn watched the widow's face change, watched something close down behind the old woman's eyes, and she knew before Pearl said a single word, and the knife bit into her own palm because she was gripping it that hard. It's nothing, Pearl said too quick. Read it. Honey, read it. Pearl's jaw worked. Then quietly, seeking one Evelyn Carter, age 1 and 20, dark hair scar on the left wrist. Traveling west may use another name. Substantial reward for her whereabouts. Wire Bartholomew Vane, care of the Cattlemen's Exchange, Fort Worth. No questions asked of the finder. The bread knife clattered to the floor. Vane, he'd sent his name out across the wires like a net cast wide across the whole of Texas. Substantial reward. She knew what that meant to men out here. She'd seen what men would do for far less than substantial. He found the road I took, she whispered. I was so careful. I paid the second driver to say I went south. I burned the ticket. Evelyn, Pearl came around the counter but stopped short of touching her as if she understood that a touch just now would break something. This Vane, this the one that did your face. Evelyn laughed and it came out wrong, cracked down the middle. No, that was my father. When I said no to the Weddies, Vane, her voice failed. She made it work again. Vane's the one I was to marry, and I know something about Vane that I'm not supposed to know, and that's worse than a scar, Mrs. Pearl. That's the kind of thing a man kills to bury. The old woman went very still, and outside on the dark street, Boots came up the boardwalk, unhurried, heavy, deliberate, and stopped at the door. It was Colt. He filled the doorway, and he'd seen the posted wire already. She could tell she'd learned to read the weather in a man's shoulders long before she could read his face, and he was holding the slip of paper the telegraph boy had run down the street to give him too, because Colt Maddox was the sort of man a telegraph boy ran to. He looked at the knife on the floor. He looked at Evelyn against the wall. He did not raise his voice, and he did not come closer. Bartholomew Vane, he said, you know him. Know of him, cattle money, rail money, bought up half the water rights north of the Brazos and let 3 ranches die of thirst so he could buy 'em cheap after. He folded the paper slow. Sort of man thinks the whole world's for sale and just hasn't been shown the price yet. Yes, Evelyn said, that's him exactly. And he wants you back. He wants me silent. The words tumbled out of her now, the dam gone. Mr. Maddox, I'll go, tonight, right now. You give me my ticket money like you said, and I'll be gone before that wire's an hour old and none of this will land on your head. I swear it, I never should have. Sit down. Come here, I've brought a curse to your Evelyn. First time he'd used her Christian name. It stopped her cold. Sit down, please. She sat. Her legs would not have held her much longer anyhow. Colt pulled out the chair across from her, turned it around and straddled it, arms folded across the back so that his eyes were level with hers and no higher. She noticed that. He'd made himself no taller than her. She noticed everything always. Noticing was how she'd stayed alive. Now, he said, you're going to tell me what you know about Bartholomew Vane, not because I'll make you. You don't owe me a word. But because there's 100 men in this county going to read that wire tonight and start doing arithmetic, and I can't stand between you and a thing I can't see. So I need to see it. All of it. The whole ugly shape of it. Evelyn looked at him a long time. Why, she said. Why would you stand between me and anything? You met me this afternoon. You don't want me, you said so yourself. You won't even marry me. So why? And Colt Maddox was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice had gone rough at the edges. Because 6 years back, there was a night a woman needed a man to cross a river for her, and the man couldn't do it, and she died waiting on him to try harder. He didn't look away from her when he said it. I don't get that night back, Miss Carter. But I'll be damned if I sit in a warm kitchen and let another woman get carried off in the dark, 'cause it wasn't strictly my business. He tapped the folded wire once against the table. So, Bartholomew Vane. Talk. She talked. She told him how her father, Silas Carter, had lost the family's cotton money to bad debt and worse whiskey, and how Bartholomew Vane had appeared like a savior with an offer to clear every note Silas owed in exchange for Evelyn's hand. She told him she was 19 when the arrangement was struck, and that she was not consulted, was informed of it the way you're informed of a change in the weather. She told him about Vane's first wife, Cornelia, dead at 23 of a weak heart, though Cornelia had been a champion horsewoman who could ride down a fence line all day. She told him about the second wife, Margaret, dead within a year of a fall down the stairs, in a house where Evelyn visiting once had counted only 4 steps. 2 wives, Colt said slowly. 3. Evelyn's voice was flat now, drained of everything but fact. There was one before Cornelia back east that nobody speaks of. A river accident. I found her name in a Bible in his study. Someone had inked it out, but you could still read it if you tilted the page to the lamp. Adelaide. She looked up. 3 wives, Mr. Maddox. 3 fortunes married in. 3 deaths. And every one of them, the family that gave her over, got their debts cleared and got a house and got told to be grateful and got told to be quiet. The kitchen was very still. You could go to the law, Colt said, but he said it like a man who already knew the answer. I did. And now the old fury came up through the fear, and it was almost good to feel it. I went to the marshal in my own town. Do you know what he did? He wired Vane that very night, because Vane owned the note on the marshal's brother's farm. Everyone owes that man something. That's how he does it. He doesn't buy your gun, Mr. Maddox. He buys your grandfather's mortgage, and then your gun comes free. Colt's knuckles had gone white on the back of the chair. So I ran, Evelyn said. The night before the wedding, my father caught me at the door. That's the face. She touched her cheek almost absently. He'd already spent the money Vane paid him. To let me go was to have to give it back, and there was no giving it back. It was gone, so my father... She stopped, steadied. My father tried to drag me to the church by my hair, and I hit him with the fire iron, and I did not stay to see if he got up. And I have not slept a full night since, because when I close my eyes, I don't know if I'm a runaway or a murderer, and I'm too much a coward to write home and find out. Silence. Then Pearl from the corner where she'd stood, forgotten, said quietly, You ain't a coward, girl. And Colt Maddox stood up, and Evelyn's whole body went rigid, waiting for the thing men did when a woman had told them too much, the disgust or the appetite or the calculation, and Colt walked to the window and looked out at the dark street where any one of 100 men might already be doing arithmetic, and he said, We go to Judge Morrison at first light. For the wedding. Her voice shook. I told you I'd... For the wedding. He turned. Now hear me and hear me right, because I'm only going to say it the once. A single woman traveling alone, a man like Vane, can post a reward, and any bounty-chasing fool can grab her, and there's no law says he can't. But a married woman. A man's wife, Vane, can holler all he likes, but to take you off my land, he'd have to go through a marriage license, a Texas judge, and me, and I promise you the last of those 3 is the worst to get through. He held her gaze. It's not romance, Darlin. I know it's not. It's a wall. And you're a woman who needs a wall between her and the dark more than she needs anything I got to offer, so I'm offering the wall. Evelyn stared at him. And what do you get? She whispered. Because there was always a price. There was always a price. What do you out of building a wall around a stranger? Colt Maddox picked up his hat. I get to cross the river, he said. Get some sleep, Miss Carter. Big day tomorrow. And he was gone into the night. She did not sleep. She lay in Widow Pearl's cleanest bed with the door barred and a chair wedged under the handle, oldest habit she had, and she listened to Dust River settle around her, and she turned the whole impossible day over and over like a stone in her palm. It's a trick, said the voice that had kept her alive. Men don't cross rivers for strangers. He wants the ranch worked for free. He wants a body in his bed by spring, and he's a patient trapper. That's all patient traps catch the most game. But another voice, smaller one she'd near forgotten she owned, said, he made himself no taller than you. He put the chair the wrong way round so he'd not look down on you. He said the woman's name Sarah like it still had teeth in him after 6 years. Traps have bait, said the first voice. Not all of them, said the second, and it was the second voice speaking that frightened her most of all because hope had cost her more than fear ever had. Toward 3 in the morning, she heard it. A horse, out on the street, walking slow. The kind of slow a rider uses when he doesn't want to be heard, and Evelyn was out of the bed and flat against the wall beside the window before the animal had gone 4 more steps, and she edged one eye to the gap in the curtain. A man, on a good horse too good for Dust River, a Fort Worth horse, a rich man's horse. He'd stopped in front of the depot. He was reading the posted wire by the light of a match cupped in his hand, and even in that thin flare of light, Evelyn could see the cut of his coat, the city cut, the money cut. And then he turned his head slow and looked up the street toward the boarding house, straight at her window. Her heart stopped. She did not breathe. There was no possible way he could see her. The room was dark, the gap in the curtain a hair's breadth, and still every animal instinct in her screamed that she'd been seen, that the net had found her, that 14 days and 15 wolves had come down to this, a man on a good horse looking up at her window in the black hours of the morning. The match went out. She heard him click to the horse, heard the hooves move off slow, unhurried toward the livery. A man settling in, a man who meant to stay a while and ask his questions in the daylight, polite with money in his hand. Evelyn slid down the wall to the floor and sat there with her knees to her chest, and she did the arithmetic herself this time. She had until dawn. If she woke Colt now, if she ran to his ranch in the dark and hammered on his door, she'd be leading the wolf straight to the one man fool enough to help her. If she ran alone on foot with no horse and no name, and a face that stood out, she'd be caught inside a day and there'd be no wall, no judge, no Colt Maddox, just Vane's hired man and a long ride back to a house with 3 dead wives in the ground behind it. Or she could do the things she'd sworn on the graves of women she'd never met that she would never do again. She could put her whole life in a man's hands and pray he was different. She was at Judge Morrison's door before the judge himself was sitting on his step in the gray light with her bag in her lap. And when Colt Maddox came up the street leading a second saddled horse for her, she realized he'd brought a horse for her as if she were a person who might want to ride her own animal instead of being hauled behind a man's. She stood up so fast she nearly fell. There's a man, she said before he'd even dismounted. Came in the night, Fort Worth horse, city coat. He read the wire. He's at the livery. Colt went very still in the saddle. You're sure it's Vane's? I'm sure of the kind. I've been sure of the kind my whole life, Mr. Maddox. It's the one thing in this world I'm never wrong about. He looked down at her a long moment. Then he swung off the horse, and he did the thing that undid her completely. He handed her the reins of the second animal, put them right in her hand, and said, then we don't waste the morning. Can you ride since I was 6? Astride, if the judge will pardon my skirts. And for just a flicker, just one, the corner of Colt Maddox's mouth moved. And it wasn't a smile exactly, but it was the country a smile came from. Darlin, he said, the judge has seen worse than your knees this side of a horse. Come on, let's go get you a wall. Judge Morrison was a wide old man with spectacles and a bad leg, and a Bible worn soft at the corners, and he did not seem surprised to be roused at dawn, which told Evelyn that Colt had already been to him the night before, had already laid the groundwork, had already spent the dark hours she'd spent shaking against a wall, arranging her safety. The knowledge sat strange in her chest. She didn't have a name for the feeling. She was so unused to being planned for rather than planned around that her body kept bracing for the catch. "You understand what this is, Miss Carter." Morrison peered at her over the spectacles. "I'll not marry a woman that's being forced. Not for love, not for money, not for safety. So I'll ask you plain and you answer me plain, and Colt can wait outside if his face is in your way." "He can stay," Evelyn said. She surprised herself. "Then plain are you here of your own will, not his, yours." Evelyn thought of Cornelia dead of a strong heart, of Margaret fallen down 4 steps, of Adelaide inked out of a Bible, of her own name traveling the wires this very morning toward every greedy man in Texas, of a wall. "I've never done a single thing of my own will in my whole life," she said. "Not one. I've done what my father said, and what Vane arranged, and what fear told me." This her voice caught, then held. "This is the first. So yes, Judge, of my own will, maybe the only thing I've ever chosen. Marry me before that changes." The old judge looked at her for a long moment over his spectacles. Then he looked at Colt, and something passed between the two men, some old understanding. "Well," said Judge Morrison and reached for the soft-cornered Bible. "That's the truest yes I've heard in this room in 20 years. Colt, go fetch Dutch off the mercantile step. He's asleep there drunk as a lord, but he'll do for a witness, and he can sign his name, which is more'n most. Let's get this done before the town's awake to gossip about it." Colt went to the door, stopped, turned back. "Miss Carter." She looked up. "Last chance to run," he said, and he meant it. She could see he meant it. He was giving her the door even now, even here, one hand already on the frame to widen it for her. Wall's a heavy thing to build. Once it's up, we're both behind it. So if there's any part of you says run, you run, and no hard feelings, and I'll ride you to the next county myself." And Evelyn Carter looked at the man who kept opening doors for her to leave through, and she understood finally the thing that had frightened her most since the moment his boot had not moved toward her in the dust. He was safe because he kept offering her the door. A trap doesn't show you the way out. Only a man who means you no harm keeps pointing at the exit and waiting to see if you'll choose the other thing. "Close the door, Mr. Maddox," she said. "There's a wolf at the livery, and I'd like my wall." He closed the door, and somewhere across town, a man in a city coat was rising from his rented bed, straightening his cuffs, counting out coins to grease the tongues of dust. River, Texas, a man who did not yet know that the woman he'd been paid to find had just of her own free will, for the first time in her life, put herself out of his reach. The judge opened the Bible. Dutch Harrison stumbled in, reeking of last night's whiskey, took one look at the bride's bruised face and the groom's grim jaw and the dawn light, and sobered up enough to hold his hat over his heart. "Dearly beloved," said Judge Morrison, "we ain't got time for the long version. Show less." "By the power vested in me by the great state of Texas," said Judge Morrison, "and by the good Lord who I hope is watching, I pronounce you man and wife. Colt, you may well. You may do whatever this particular arrangement calls for." And Colt Maddox did not kiss her. He put out his hand instead. Evelyn looked at that hand broad-scarred across the knuckles, a working man's hand, and she understood the offering in it. He was not claiming her mouth. He was offering her a handshake the way you'd close a deal between equals, and something in her chest cracked clean down the middle, because in all her 21 years, no man had ever once treated a bargain with her like she was the other party to it, instead of the goods being traded. She took his hand, shook it. Her fingers were cold and his were warm, and neither of them let the shake linger. "Mrs. Maddox," Dutch Harrison slurred from the corner and hiccuped and beamed at them both like a man who'd wandered into a wedding by mistake and decided to enjoy it. "That's got a fine ring, don't it, Mrs. Maddox?" "Sign the paper, Dutch," said the judge. Dutch signed the paper. It took him 3 tries to get his name where the line was. And it was done. 2 minutes of words and a shaky signature from a drunk, and Evelyn Carter was gone out of the world, and Evelyn Maddox stood in her place, and the strangest part was that she felt no different in her body at all, and yet the whole shape of her future had just been bent by an old man with a soft Bible. "Now hear me." Morrison folded his spectacles and leaned across the desk, and the good humor had gone out of him, and what was left was grave. "This paper's a wall, like Colt says, but it ain't a fort. A rich man with lawyers can lean on a wall a long time, and a poor county judge like me can only hold the door so far. You understand me, girl?" "I understand a wall's not a fort," Evelyn said. "Good, then understand this too. He tapped the license where the ink was still wet. The day Bartholomew Vane learns you're married, he's got two roads. He can go to law and try to prove the marriage a fraud, and he might if he can show you married only to dodge him, or the old man's jaw worked. He can decide the law is too slow and send men to make the whole problem disappear on a dark night and swear before God he never heard your name. I've known his kind 30 years on this bench. I'd not wager which road he takes. The little office went quiet. Then we don't give him a fraud to prove, Colt said. They both looked at him. What's that mean? Evelyn said slowly. Colt turned his hat in his hands. Means we don't live like it's a paper marriage. Means as far as this county's concerned, as far as any lawyer Vane sends to snoop, you're my wife in full and always have been. You live under my roof. You take my name in the mercantile and the church. You're Mrs. Maddox to every soul in Dust River. And there's not one crack for a lawyer to get his fingers into. He met her eyes. Separate rooms behind our own door is our business and God's. But out where the world can see no daylight between us, not 1 inch. That's the only way a wall holds. Evelyn's throat had gone tight. Because it was sound, it was exactly coldly sound, a strategy she'd have arrived at herself if she'd had a night to think. And that was the thing about Colt Maddox that kept catching her off guard, he thought like she thought. He'd looked at the same board of danger and moved the same pieces, and he'd done it while she slept, no, while she'd sat shaking against a wall. You thought all this through, she said. Last night, before you knew about the man at the livery, before any of it. A man's got to. Most men don't. Then most men, Colt said, haven't buried what I've buried. He set his hat on his head. Come on, wife. We got to be gone before your wolf finishes his coffee. They did not run into the man at the livery. Evelyn watched for him the whole way to the edge of town, her spine a rod of iron, her eyes going to every doorway, every window, every alley, mouth, and Colt let her watch. Didn't tell her she was jumping at shadows. Didn't tell her to calm herself, just rode a half-length ahead with his hand loose near the rifle scabbard and let her be exactly as afraid as she needed to be. But the wolf did not show himself, and that Evelyn thought was worse than if he had. He's not looking in the daylight, she said when the last of Dust River had dropped behind them. He's asking questions, buying answers. By tonight, he'll know a rancher named Maddox came into town and left with a bruised woman off the eastern stage. By tomorrow, he'll know my new name. Likely. You're very calm about a man learning where I sleep. Colt was quiet a moment, the horses walking easy beneath them. I'm calm, he said, because I spent 6 years wishing I had one more chance at a night that mattered, and now I've got one. And a man that's got what he prayed for can afford to be calm. He glanced at her. You're not calm, and you shouldn't be. Between the two of us, we've got it about right, one afraid, one steady. That's a whole person's worth of sense split across two heads. And Evelyn Maddox, who had not laughed in longer than she could remember, felt something jerk in her chest that might in a healthier woman have become a laugh. She looked away before he could see it. The ranch, when they came to it, was smaller than she'd braced for and cleaner than she'd feared. A low house, a good barn fences a man kept up, cattle scattered dark across the grass. And it was the fences that told her the most. A man who mended his fences was a man who finished things, who did not let the world fall in on him from neglect. But she did not let the fences soften her. She'd been soothed by a well-kept house before. Vane's house had been the finest she'd ever set foot in. Barn's yours to walk if you want to know the place, Colt said, dismounting. House is yours to walk too. Your room is the east one, gets the morning sun, and a woman that don't sleep easy at least ought to be a nice thing to wake to. Door's got a bolt on the inside. I put it on last night. Evelyn had swung down off her own horse. She stopped. You put a bolt on my door. Last night, after the judge before I slept. He was loosening the cinch, not looking at her, giving her the privacy of his turned shoulder. Figured a woman who wedges chairs under handles might sleep better with a real bolt. Slides from the inside. I can't open it. Nobody can but you. She stood there holding the reins of a horse that was hers now, in front of a house with a bolt on the door that only she could work, and Evelyn Maddox felt the things she'd feared most since the dust of the stagecoach. She felt her guard slip. Just a hair. Just for a breath. And a hair was too much. A hair was how women ended up in the ground with strong hearts and short staircases. So she snatched the guard back up and made her voice flat. Why? Colt finally looked at her over the horse's back. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm going to be answering that question a lot of ways for a lot of days, and every answer is going to be some version of the same thing. So let me just give you the whole of it now and save us both the trouble." He set the saddle over the rail. "I'm not building a bolt so you'll trust me. I'm building a bolt so you don't have to. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference. And if you never trust me a day in your life, that bolt still slides, and you still sleep, and I still did right. That's all I'm after. You sleeping. The rest is your business and yours alone." And then he took her horse's reins from her cold hand and led both animals toward the barn and left her standing in the yard with her heart doing something it had not done in years and no name for it and no defense against it either. The first days were the hardest, and not for the reasons she'd braced for. She'd braced for his patience to wear thin. It didn't. She'd braced for the separate room to become a resentment he'd air out sideways in cold silences or sharp words. They didn't. She'd braced most of all for the night he'd finally decided he'd waited long enough and come to the east door and find it bolted and turn ugly about it, because that was how it always went. Kindness was just the long approach a certain kind of man took to the same old grab. That night didn't come either. What came instead was a routine so plain it unsettled her worse than cruelty. He rose before dawn. He worked. He came in filthy and tired and ate what she'd learned to cook from Widow Pearl's hasty lessons, and he thanked her for it every single time. And when she flinched, which she still did at a raised hand, reaching only for the salt at a boot heel too loud, on the boards he simply stopped and let the flinch pass and went on as if it were as ordinary as weather, which she supposed to him it had become. "You don't ask about it," she said one evening a week in. "The flinching. Any of it. You'll tell me what you want me to know." "Most men would want to know." "Most men," Colt said, mopping gravy with a heel of bread, "confuse wanting to know with having a right to. I want to know plenty. Haven't got a right to any of it that you don't hand me." He ate the bread. "Anyhow, I already know the thing that matters." "Which is?" He looked at her across the table, steady as a fence post. "That somebody spent a long time teaching you a man's kindness is bait, and that you're brave enough to eat at his table anyway while you wait to find out if he's the exception." He stood, gathered his plate. "That's the only fact about you I need, Evelyn. The rest'll keep." She sat very still after he'd gone to wash the plate. Because he'd named it. The exact machinery of her fear laid out plain on the table between the salt in the bread, and he hadn't done it to prove himself clever or to pry the rest loose. He'd done it to tell her he saw, and that seeing it, he'd wait anyway on the far side of a table with no reaching hand. That was the night she slid the bolt for the first time and didn't wedge the chair. She lay awake a long while listening to the strange safety of it, and when she finally slept, she slept 4 hours unbroken, which was more than she'd managed in a year, and she woke not knowing where she was, and for one blessed moment before memory came flooding back, she was not afraid of anything at all. It was Dutch Harrison who brought the news 10 days into the marriage, riding hard up the track with his hat gone and his face gray. Evelyn saw him coming from the yard, and her whole body knew before her mind did she was already moving toward the house, toward the rifle Colt kept by the door, her hands already sure on it, though she'd have sworn she'd never touched a long gun in her life. Colt, Dutch hauled his lathered horse to a stop. "Colt, where's Colt?" "Barn," Evelyn said, the rifle low along her leg. "What is it?" Dutch looked at the gun, then at her face, and whatever he saw there made him talk straight to her instead of waiting for the man. "There's a fella in town," he panted. "Come in on the Fort Worth Road, asking after a Maddox, asking after a woman with a mark on her face. Flashing money, Mrs. Maddox. Real money, and he's got 2 more with him. Now come in this morning, hard-looking boys. The kind that don't ask twice." He wiped his mouth. "And he's got a paper, saying you're a runaway wife, saying Colt stole another man's wife, saying it loud at the Mercantile where the whole town could hear." The rifle nearly slipped from Evelyn's hand. A runaway wife. The lie was so perfect, so exactly shaped to fit the crack in her arm, that for a sick swimming moment she almost believed it herself. Because who would the town side with a rancher's brand new bruised bride nobody knew? Or a rich man with papers and money and 3 hard men in a story that fit every ugly thing folks like to believe about a woman who turned up damaged and desperate? That's not, she started. I know it ain't, Dutch said quickly. I know Mrs. Maddox. I was there at the wedding. I signed the paper drunk as I was. I signed it, but his face twisted. But it's my name on your license as witness. And now there's a fella in town saying the wedding was a sham to steal a man's wife, and he's looking for the witness and Mrs. Maddox. His voice dropped. I owe money at that mercantile. Owe it to the same store that fella's standing in flashing his roll. And he knows it. He looked right at my account in the ledger, and he smiled at me. And there it was. Vane's whole method arrived in Dust River not 10 days behind her. He didn't buy your gun. He bought the debt behind your gun, and then your gun came free. Colt had come out of the barn. He crossed the yard slow, taking it all. In Dutch's gray face, the rifle in his wife's hand, the sweat-black horse. Say it again, he said quietly. For me this time. Dutch said it again. And Evelyn watched Colt Maddox listen, and she watched something happen in him that she had not seen before. The steadiness she'd taken for softness went hard, went to iron the way water goes to ice. When he spoke, his voice hadn't risen at all. That was the frightening part. It had gone lower. How much you owe at the mercantile, Dutch? Colt, how much? $18. Dutch would not meet his eyes. In some sense. Colt reached into his vest and counted out money into Dutch's hand. Not $18, but more, a good deal more, and closed the man's fingers over it. You go back to town, he said. You pay off that whole account today in front of the storekeep, in front of Gwen and everybody. And then you don't owe that store 1 red cent, and the next time that fella smiles at you over the ledger, there's nothing in the ledger to smile at. You hear me? Dutch stared at the money in his fist. You do that for a drunk that can't hardly hold his name to a line. I'm not doing it for the drunk, Colt said. I'm doing it for the witness. A free man's word holds up in a courtroom. A man that owes the plaintiff's friend $18 his word's already bought, and everybody knows it. He clapped Dutch once on the shoulder. Go on, pay your debt, then keep your mouth shut and your eyes open and come tell me anything else you see. Can you do that? Dutch's eyes had gone wet. He was not a man used to being bought free. He was a man used to being bought. I can do that, he said. By God, Colt, I can do that. And he wheeled his horse and rode back toward town, sitting a little straighter in the saddle than he'd sat coming in. You just spent $30, Evelyn said when Dutch was gone, to make sure a drunk tells the truth. I spent $30, Colt said, taking the rifle gently from her hands. She'd forgotten she still held it. To take 1 card out of Vane's hand. He's going to play this in a courtroom, or he's going to play it in the dark, and either way, he wins by owning the folks around us. So I'm going to go around quiet, and I'm going to unown them, one at a time, fast as I can, before he finishes buying the whole town out from under us. Evelyn looked at him. You can't buy a whole town, Colt. You're a rancher. He's got railroad money. No. Colt broke the rifle open, checked it, closed it. I can't outbid him, but I don't have to. He's buying debts. That's fear money. That's a man leaning on folks' weak spots. I'm not buying anything. I'm just paying folks' debts off, so there's no weak spot left to lean on. Cost me a fraction of what it costs him, because a debt paid stays paid, but a man bought stays bought only as long as you keep paying. He set the rifle by the door. He's renting this town. I'm just quietly buying back the pieces he needs most. And there's one thing he's got that I've got, and he don't. What? These are my neighbors, Colt said simply. He's a stranger flashing a roll. 10 years I've pulled these folks' cattle out of bogs and sat up with their sick and never once collected on a favor. That ledger don't show up in any mercantile book, but it's real and it's mine, and today's the day I finally get to spend it. He looked at her. Get your coat, Mrs. Maddox. We're going visiting. Sorry, they went visiting. Not to hide, that was the thing that terrified her and thrilled her in equal measure. Colt's whole strategy was the opposite of hiding. He took her out into the county to one homestead after another, and at every door he did the same thing. He stood beside her, plain in the daylight, and he introduced her. This is my wife, he said, at the Peterson place, at the Vaughn place, at old Mrs. Locklear's soddy. Evelyn, we married quick. My fault. I've been alone too long and didn't want to give her time to change her mind. A small laugh here, self-deprecating, disarming. There's a fella come into town telling stories about her. Rich fella from Fort Worth. I'd take it kindly if you heard my side before you heard his. And then he'd let her talk. That was the part that undid her every time. He didn't tell her story for her. He stepped back, physically, stepped back half a pace, so the neighbor's eyes went to her and not to him. And he let Evelyn Maddox stand in her own two boots and say her own true words to people who would decide her fate. "I was promised to that man against my will," she said at the Peterson kitchen table, her hands folded to keep them from shaking. "To pay my father's debts, and 3 women married him before me, and all 3 are in the ground, and I ran because I meant not to be the 4th. She lifted her chin. "You can believe me, or you can believe his money. But I'd ask you to notice which of us is asking you to believe, and which of us is paying you to." Old Anna Peterson looked at her a long time. Then the farm wife reached across the table and covered Evelyn's folded hands with her own rough ones. "My sister," Anna said quietly, "married a man like that back in Ohio. We buried her at 26. Doctor called it a weak constitution." Her mouth went flat. She could outwork any man on that farm. "Weak constitution, my foot." She squeezed Evelyn's hands. "You tell your rich fella Anna Peterson's got a long memory and a loaded gun, and she uses both." And Evelyn Maddox, who had walked into that kitchen, braced for judgment, walked out with an ally and understood finally what Colt had done. He hadn't taken her out into danger. He'd taken her out to build the fort. Every neighbor who heard her true words with their own ears was one more soul Vane couldn't buy, because you can't buy a person out of a thing they saw plain with their own eyes and felt in their own gut. By nightfall, half the county knew Evelyn's story, not Vane's version, hers. "Shot them." They came back to the ranch in the dark, both of them tired down to the bone, and Evelyn found that the fear that had ridden her spine all day had loosened its grip. Not gone, never gone, but loosened. "You did that on purpose," she said at the door. "Made me tell it. All day. You could have told it for me. You'd have told it better." "No," Colt said. "I'd have told it smoother, not better." He hung his hat. "A man tells your story, folks hear a man defending his wife, and half of them wonder what he's covering. A woman tells her own story plain looking him in the eye that they believe. Because a liar performs. You didn't perform, Evelyn. You just told the truth like it cost you to say it, which it did, and there's not a soul born can fake that." He looked at her. "Vane's whole game is making you small, making you the runaway, the property, the problem to be handled. Every time you stand up and speak for yourself, you break that. So no, I wasn't going to do it for you. Doing it for you is just a kinder version of him doing it to you." Evelyn stood in the doorway of the house that was somehow becoming hers, and she looked at this man who kept over and over handing her back to herself, and the thing in her chest that had no name, cracked open a little wider. "You keep giving me back my own life," she said, and her voice was not steady. "Piece by piece, like it was never yours to keep." It wasn't. Most men think it is, the minute they've got a paper on you. "Then I'll say it plain as I can, and then I'll shut up about it." Colt Maddox stood a careful arm's length away, hat in his hand, and he did not step closer. "You're not mine, Evelyn. The paper don't make you mine. Nothing makes you mine. You're your own start to finish, and I married you to build a wall around your ownness, not to knock it down. If the day comes you want to walk out that door a free woman and never look back, I'll saddle your horse and tip my hat. That's not me being noble. That's just what the word marriage is supposed to mean, and mostly don't." Evelyn looked at him for a long, long moment. And then she did a thing she had not done not once in the whole long nightmare of her life. She reached out of her own will and took his rough hand in both of hers and held it. Just held it and did not let it go. Colt Maddox went very still. "Thank you," she said, "for the wall, Evelyn." "Don't." She squeezed his hand. "Don't tell me it's nothing. Don't make it small so I'll feel easier. It's not nothing. It's the first safe thing anyone ever built for me and didn't hand me a bill for. So let me thank you for it, and let me mean it, and don't you dare take that away from me too." And Colt Maddox, who had not been touched with tenderness by another soul in 6 long years, stood in his own doorway holding his wife's hands in his, and could not for the life of him find a single word. So he didn't try to find one. He just held on. It should have been the end of the hardest day. It should have been rest. But the dog started barking. Colt's hand went from hers to the rifle in one motion so fast it was already done before she'd registered the sound, and he'd stepped in front of her, not shoving her behind him like property to be shielded, but placing his body between her and the dark, the way you'd place a wall on purpose with her consent, assumed only because there was no time to ask. "Get the bolt," he said low. "Your room, now." Colt, now Evelyn. But she didn't go. She reached past him and took the second rifle off its pegs. She'd watched him check it that morning. She knew it was loaded, and she stood at his shoulder, and when he glanced at her sharp, she looked back just as hard. "I'm done hiding behind walls while men fight over me," she said. "You built me a wall so I could stand Colt. So let me stand." And there was no time to argue it because a voice came out of the dark of the yard, smooth, cultured, unhurried, a Fort Worth voice, a money voice, and it froze the blood in Evelyn's veins before her mind even placed it. Because her body knew it, her body would always know it. "Mrs. Maddox," said Bartholomew Vane from somewhere out past the reach of the lamplight. "Or should I say Miss Carter? I do think we're past the need for the fiction, don't you?" A pause, she could hear the smile in it. "Won't you call off the dog? I've come all this way. The least you could do is offer an old friend some coffee." And Evelyn Maddox stood in the doorway of the only safe place she'd ever known, with a rifle in her hands and her husband at her shoulder, and looked out into the dark where the man who'd buried 3 wives was waiting patient as ever to make her the 4th. "Nobody's offering you coffee," Colt said into the dark, "and nobody's calling off the dog. You want to talk? You talk from right where you're standing, hands where I can see 'em, and the first man moves toward this house gets shot for a trespasser, which I've every legal right to do at night on my own land. That's Texas law. Ask any judge." A soft laugh drifted back through the black. "You've done your reading, Mr. Maddox. How admirable. A man who knows the law." Boots crunched, slow, unhurried, coming just to the edge of the lamplight, and no further, and then Bartholomew Vane was there, and Evelyn's whole body seized at the sight of him. She had forgotten how ordinary he looked. That was the horror of it. She'd built him up in her nightmares into something monstrous. And here he was, a well-fed man in a good coat with soft hands and kind eyes and a warm, patient smile, the sort of man you'd trust with your daughter, the sort of man mothers push toward their girls at socials. He looked like decency itself, and she knew that 3 women had learned too late what lived behind that pleasant face. "Evelyn," Vane said, and his voice went gentle, and the gentleness was worse than any shout. "My dear girl, look at your face. Look what running has done to you." He shook his head, sorrowful. "You've fallen in with a stranger. Married him in a panic. I understand, and grief makes us reckless, and you were grieving. Weren't you running from your poor father's house?" "You don't get to say my father," Evelyn said. Her voice came out steadier than her hands. "You bought me from him like a heifer, and you know it. I saved your family from ruin is what I did." A flicker, just a flicker, behind the pleasant eyes. "But we needn't quarrel over the past. I've come to make things right. I'll pay this man for his trouble." He nodded at Colt, handsomely. "A fraudulent marriage quickly annulled, no blame to anyone. And you come home, Evelyn, where you belong, and we'll put this ugliness behind us and never speak of it again." The smile widened. "I'm a forgiving man." "You're a patient one," Evelyn said. "That's different." And she watched the flicker come again, longer this time, because she'd landed a blow he hadn't expected. And Bartholomew Vane was a man wholly unused to a woman who hit back. "Here's what happens now," Colt said, and he came a step forward into the lamplight, himself rifle easy across his forearm, putting his own body into the light so Vane could see him plain. "You're going to get back on whatever horse you rode in on, and you and your 2 hired men out there in the dark. Yeah, I count 'em. I've got a dog that counts better than I do. You're all going to ride back to town. And come morning, if you've got a legal claim, you take it to Judge Morrison like an honest man in the daylight in a courtroom with your papers on the table." A county judge. Vane's contempt was gentle as everything else about him. In a courtroom the size of a chicken coop. "That county judge," Colt said, "married us, signed and sealed. So your fraud claim starts out having to call a sitting Texas judge either a liar or a fool to his face in his own court. You want to try that, you're welcome. But that's the only road I'm leaving open to you. Law, daylight, or nothing." Vane was quiet a moment. When he spoke again, the warmth had cooled by a single degree, the first honest thing he'd shown all night. "You're a clever man, Mr. Maddox, cleverer than a rancher has any right to be." He tilted his head. "But you're betting everything on the law being fair. And the law, The smile came back, and now there was iron under it. The law is only ever as fair as the men who owe you nothing. And out here, Mr. Maddox, everyone owes someone, even you. Everyone has a debt. I've simply made a career of finding them. Then you'll have found, Colt said, that I don't owe a living soul one thin dime. Look all you want. Ledger's clean. He raised the rifle a bare inch. Now get off my land. You've had your visit. For a long, terrible moment, Vane didn't move, and Evelyn's finger found the trigger guard of her own rifle, and she thought he won't go. Men like him don't go. They take. Then Bartholomew Vane touched the brim of his hat courtly, as a gentleman leaving a dance. Good night, Evelyn, he said softly. You look tired, my dear. Truly. You always did work so hard at things that were only ever going to end one way. He turned, paused. Do give my regards to the good judge. Morrison was it, I'll want to know all about him. And then over his shoulder mild as milk. It would be a shame if an old man with a bad leg took a fall. Stairs are treacherous at his age. And he walked back into the dark, and his two men melted out of the black behind him. And the three of them rode off into the night unhurried, always unhurried, and left the threat hanging in the air behind them like smoke. Stairs are treacherous. Margaret had died on 4 steps. Evelyn's legs gave out. Colt caught her by the arm before she hit the boards. Caught and held, and did not let go, and did not make it a thing. Just held her up until her knees came back. He's going to kill the judge, she whispered. You heard him. He said stairs. He told Margaret's whole story right to my face and dared me to understand it. He's going to kill Morrison so there's no one to swear the marriage was real. I heard him, Colt said grimly, which means we ride to town tonight, right now, because a threat said out loud is a threat a man means to keep. They did not sleep. They saddled fresh horses and rode the dark road back to Dust River with the dog loping alongside, and Colt did not once tell her to stay behind, and Evelyn understood by now that this was his highest form of respect. He treated her as a partner in her own survival, not a parcel to be stowed somewhere safe. They went straight to Judge Morrison's and hammered on his door until a lamp bloomed in the window, and the old man came to the door in his nightshirt with a shotgun in his hands, which told Evelyn something good about how long Morrison had survived on that bench. Vane came to the ranch, Colt said before the judge could speak. Threatened you by name. Talked about old men taking falls on stairs. Morrison's face gray with sleep went hard as flint. Did he? The old judge lowered the shotgun. Come in, both of you. Mind the third step, it's loose. And then he caught himself and barked a short, grim laugh. Well, ain't that a thing? Man threatens me over stairs, and my own stairs are already trying to kill me. Come in. They came in. And what Evelyn learned in the next hour changed everything. Because Judge Morrison, it turned out, was not a frightened old man with a bad leg. He was a man who had spent 40 years watching money try to buy his court, and he had a strongbox, and in the strongbox were things. Bartholomew Vane, the judge said, setting a lamp on the table and pulling a battered ledger from the box, is not a new name to me. You think you're the first girl. He looked at Evelyn over his spectacles. 6 years back, a lawyer came through here trying to get me to sign off on a land transfer up on the Brazos. Vane's water rights business. 3 ranches drying up while he sat on the deeds. Something stunk about the paper, so I did a thing judges mostly don't bother to do. He tapped the ledger. I wrote it down, names, dates, which of Vane's papers didn't smell right and why. Been adding to it 6 years every time his name crossed my bench. It's not evidence enough to hang him, but it's a start. It's a thread. Evelyn stared at the ledger. You've been keeping a record on him for 6 years. I keep a record on every man that tries to buy my court, Morrison said. Vane's is just the fattest. He flipped it open. A Cornelia Vane, Guerdon, née Ashford, married 1879, dead 1882, estate of $40,000 passed clean to the widower. Margaret Vane, née Coyle, married 1882, dead 1883, estate of $60,000. He looked up, passed clean to the widower. You see the shape of it, girl. I've seen it for years. What I never had, and here the old man's voice dropped, what I never once had in all these years was a living witness. Somebody who was inside it and got out breathing. Every woman who could have told the truth about Bartholomew Vane died before she could tell it. The room went silent. Until now, Colt said quietly. And Judge Morrison looked at Evelyn Maddox across the lamplit table and he said, until you, Mrs. Maddox, you're the first one who ran fast enough. You're the witness 3 dead women needed and never had. And that, he closed the ledger, is exactly why that man will burn this whole county down before he lets you draw breath in a courtroom. Yeah. Evelyn sat very still, because she understood now all the way down what she was. Not a runaway, not a frightened bride, not a problem for men to fight over. She was a weapon, the one thing in the world that could bring Bartholomew Vane down, and she'd been carrying it inside her the whole time, thinking it was only a burden, only the thing that got her hunted. Then I don't run, she said slowly, testing the words in her mouth like a new language. That's what he wants. He wants me to run or hide or die quiet so the thread stays broken. He spent his whole life making the witnesses disappear. She looked up and something had changed in her face. The fear was still there, but under it now was something with a spine. So I don't disappear. I do the opposite. I stand up in your courtroom, Judge, in the daylight in front of the whole county, and I say every word. Cornelia, Margaret, Adelaide, the Bible with the inked out name, all of it, out loud, where he can't take it back. That's brave, Morrison said. It's also how you get killed. He'll never let you reach the stand. Then we make it so he can't stop me. Evelyn turned to Colt. That's what you've been doing it all along, isn't it? Unowning the town, one neighbor at a time, building a fort out of people. Her voice picked up speed. So, we finish it, not quiet anymore, loud. We tell every soul in this county exactly what I know, so that if I fall down a set of stairs or take a fever, or drown in a creek, every single one of them knows it was Vane and knows why and knows the whole story I'd have told. You can't murder a witness whose testimony's already in 50 mouths. Colt was looking at her like he'd never quite seen her before. That's, he started. Dangerous, she finished. I know, but he's already going to try to kill me. The only question is whether he kills a woman with a secret or a woman whose secret's already loose. And a loose secret. She almost smiled and it was fierce. A loose secret makes killing me worse than useless. It makes me more dangerous dead than alive. That's the wall, Colt. Not the marriage. The truth spreads so wide he can't burn it all. Judge Morrison began slowly to laugh, a dry, delighted, dangerous old man's laugh. 6 years, he said. I've been waiting for one of them to figure that out. And it took a bruised girl off the eastern stage 10 days married. He slapped the table. By God, Mrs. Maddox, you're not the 4th wife. You're the reckoning. He stood wincing on the bad leg. Now, if we're doing this, we're doing it right. And doing it right means we're going to need a good deal more than the 3 of us. We're going to need this whole county lined up so tight that Bartholomew Vane's money's got nowhere to slide in. You think you can talk to a courtroom girl? I talked to Anna Peterson's kitchen table, Ulla said. A courtroom's just a bigger table. But Vane moved first. He always moved first. That was the whole terror of him. He was always one step into the dark ahead of you. And the morning after they'd sat in Judge Morrison's kitchen, making their plans, the thread began to unravel from an end none of them had guarded. Dutch Harrison did not come to breakfast at Widow Pearl's, where he'd taken to eating since Colt paid off his debt. And when Colt rode to the shack, Dutch called home to see about it. He found the door open and the stove cold, and Dutch gone and a single boot lying in the yard, as though a man had been dragged from it in a hurry. They took the witness, Colt said, riding back into the ranch yard, hard his face like a closed fist. Dutch, he signed our license. Vane's grabbed him. Evelyn's stomach dropped. To do what? Kill him. Worse. To use him. Colt swung down. Think it through the way Vane thinks. A dead witness is suspicious, raises questions, it gets folks stirred up. But a witness who recants, a drunk who stands up and says, I was paid to sign that license, the marriage was a fraud, I never saw a real wedding. That's gold to Vane. That breaks our marriage in court, and it does it legal with a signature and a sworn statement, and nobody has to fall down any stairs. He was already reloading the rifle. He's not going to kill Dutch. He's going to buy him or scare him or pour enough whiskey down him to sign anything. And then Dutch says the wall was never real, and the wall comes down and you're a single woman again with a reward on your head. Evelyn felt the fear rising, the old drowning fear, and she fought it down. Then we get him back. He's got two hard men and a mansion of money, and Dutch is a drunk who owes his soul to whoever fills his cup. There's no getting him back, Evelyn. There's only, Colt stopped. Only what? Colt Maddox looked at her, and for the first time since the dust of the stagecoach, she saw genuine helplessness cross his face, and it frightened her more than Vane's smile had. Only getting to Dutch's heart faster than Vane gets to his fear, Colt said. And I don't know that a man can outrun another man's fear. I've been trying to buy this town free of it for 10 days, and Vane's been selling it for a lifetime. Fear's an older debt than any I can pay off. And into that helplessness, into that first crack in Colt Maddox's iron, Evelyn Maddox did a thing that surprised them both. She stepped forward and put her hand flat on his chest the first time she had ever touched him, without a table or a door frame or a horse between them, the first time she had reached for a man in years without her body bracing to be grabbed, and she said, "Then we don't fight Vane's fear with money. We fight it with the one thing Vane's never once given anybody in his whole life, which is a way out that doesn't cost anything." Her hand was steady on his heart. "You did it for Dutch already. You paid his debt and asked nothing. You did it for me. You built a bolt I could work and asked nothing. Vane owns people by their fear and their debts, Colt. But you've spent 10 days proving there's a man in this county who frees people and asks nothing back. Dutch knows that. Dutch felt it. He rode out of your yard sitting straighter than he came in. I saw it." Her eyes held his. "So we don't buy Dutch back. We remind him what it felt like to be free for one day. And we make him choose which man he wants to be. The one Vane owns, or the one who signed his name true to a good woman's marriage license and stood up in the daylight." Colt covered her hand with his own, pressed it against his chest. "That's a thin thread to hang a man's courage on," he said quietly. "It's the same thread you hung mine on," Evelyn said. "And here I am, still standing, so on." They rode for Vane's rented house in town at noon in the full daylight, and they did not go quiet and they did not go hidden. Colt sent word ahead through every neighbor they'd visited, the Petersons, old Mrs. Locklear, the Vaughns, so that by the time Evelyn and Colt rode up the main street of Dust River, half the county was drifting out onto the boardwalks to watch, drawn by a thing they'd been told was coming. That was Evelyn's plan, and it was a good one. You can't do a private cruelty in front of a crowd. Bartholomew Vane came out onto the porch of the fine house he'd rented, and beside him, Evelyn's heart clenched, stood Dutch Harrison, cleaned up sober, in a new coat Vane's money had surely bought, holding a paper in his shaking hands. And Vane was smiling his warm and patient smile, and he had a lawyer at his other shoulder, and the whole thing had the look of a performance carefully staged. "Mrs. Maddox," Vane called out, warm as sunshine, loud enough for the whole street. "How good of you to come. And in time to hear some sad news, I'm afraid. It seems your marriage wasn't quite what you believed." He put a fatherly hand on Dutch's shoulder, and Evelyn saw Dutch flinch under it, the exact flinch she knew from her own body. "This good man has something to say. Go on, Mr. Harrison. Tell them what you told me. Tell them the truth." The whole street went quiet. Dutch Harrison looked down at the paper in his hands. His mouth worked. Evelyn could see the war in him playing the fear on one side, Vane's hand heavy on his shoulder, the new coat, the money that would clear whatever debt still hung on him. And on the other side, one single day of being bought free by a man who'd asked nothing. "Dutch," Colt said, just his name, quiet across the street. Not a plea, not a threat, just his name said by the man who'd freed him. Dutch raised his eyes, and Evelyn stepped her horse forward alone into the middle of the street where the whole county could see her, and she did not speak to Dutch about the marriage or the law or the paper in his hands. She spoke about the thing that mattered. "Dutch," she said gentle, "how much is he paying you to be his man?" Silence. "Because whatever it is," she went on, "I want you to know something. The day Colt paid off your account at the Mercantile, he told me why. He said a free man's word holds up, but a bought man's word is worth nothing, and everybody knows it. He didn't pay your debt to buy you Dutch. He paid it to unbuy you, to make you a man whose word was your own again." Her voice carried clear down the whole street. "And now here's Mr. Vane offering to buy you right back. New coat, full pockets, and a script to read. So you've got to choose Dutch Harrison right here in front of everybody. Do you want to be a man that's owned? Or do you want to stay the free man? Colt Maddox made you for one single day." Dutch Harrison stood on the fine porch with Vane's hand on his shoulder and the whole county watching, and he looked at the paper and he looked at Evelyn and he looked at Colt. And Bartholomew Vane, sensing the moment slipping, made his one mistake. He tightened his grip on Dutch's shoulder. Just that, just a squeeze, a small cruelty, a reminder of who was master, the exact gesture of a man who had always owned people and had forgotten in his patience and his certainty that a man being squeezed can feel it. And Dutch Harrison, who had spent his whole life being squeezed by one man or another, felt Vane's fingers dig into his shoulder, and something in him, some last ember Colt had lit and Evelyn had fanned, caught fire. He shrugged the hand off. He stepped away from Bartholomew Vane to the front of the porch into the open, where the whole street could see him, and he tore the paper in his hands clean in half. "I signed a true license," Dutch Harrison said, and his voice shook, but it carried. "For a true marriage. I was drunk, but I wasn't blind. That woman married that man of her own will, and Judge Morrison sealed it, and it's real as this street we're standing on." He threw the torn halves down at Vane's polished boots. "And I ain't for sale, mister. Not no more. There's a man in this county paid my debt and asked me for nothing, and I'd sooner die poor and free than live rich and owned. So you can keep your coat." He shrugged off the new coat too and let it fall and walked down off that porch in his shirt sleeves into the dusty street past Vane's stunned, hired men straight to Colt's stirrup, and he stood there sober and shaking and free. The whole street had gone dead silent. And then old Anna Peterson from the boardwalk began to clap, and then Widow Pearl, and then one by one, and then all at once, the whole of Dust River, Texas, the town Bartholomew Vane had come to buy, stood on its boardwalks and applauded a drunk who wouldn't be bought, while the richest man any of them had ever seen stood alone on a rented porch with two torn halves of a worthless paper at his feet. Evelyn watched Vane's face, and for one instant, one single instant, before the warm, patient mass slid back down over it, she saw the thing underneath. She saw what Cornelia must have seen in Margaret and Adelaide in their last moments. Not anger, not even hate. Astonishment. The pure, affronted astonishment of a man who had never once in his life been told no by anyone he'd decided to own. He looked across the street directly at her, and the mask came down and the warm smile returned, and he inclined his head to her with terrible courtesy, the nod of a man acknowledging that the game had merely unexpectedly gotten interesting. Then Bartholomew Vane turned and walked back into his fine rented house and shut the door. And Evelyn Maddox, sitting her horse in the middle of a cheering street with a freed man at her stirrup and her husband at her side, understood that she had just won the first battle of her life, and that she had, in winning it, made herself the most dangerous woman in Texas to the most patient killer she had ever known. The closed door did not fool Evelyn for 1 second. She rode home beside Colt with Dutch trotting behind on a borrowed mule, and while the whole county was still buzzing about the drunk who wouldn't be bought, she was already turning the other thing over in her mind, the astonishment she'd seen on Vane's face and the courtesy that had come after it. "He's not beaten," she said when the ranch came into view. "You know that." "I know it." A beaten man rages. A beaten man threatens. She watched the fences roll past. "Vane bowed to me, Colt. He thanked me near enough for making it interesting. That's not a man who's lost. That's a man who's decided to stop being patient and start being fast." Colt's jaw tightened. "Then we get to the courtroom before he gets fast. Morrison can call a hearing. 3 days, maybe 4, to get folks summoned and the county gathered. We put you on the stand. We spread the truth so wide it can't be burned, and we finish this in the daylight, where his money don't shine so bright." 3 days, Evelyn said quietly. "Can you keep me alive 3 days?" Colt looked at her, and he did not lie to her, and she loved him a little for that. The thought arrived plain and unafraid, and she was too tired and too honest to flinch from it. "I can try like hell," he said. "That'll do," said Evelyn Maddox. "It's more than anyone's ever offered before." The first day nothing happened, and the nothing was worse than any attack. Vane did not come. His men did not come. No word came from town, and Evelyn, who had spent her whole life reading the weather in men, knew that this silence was Vane building something, and she could not see what, and not seeing was the particular torture the man specialized in. Colt fortified what he could. He moved Dutch into the barn so there'd be a witness who couldn't be spirited away in the night. He sent Dutch's borrowed mule back to town carrying a letter to Judge Morrison, call the hearing fast as the law allows, and post it public. And he took to sleeping in the front room with the rifle across his knees, and Evelyn took to sleeping not at all. And the two of them passed each other in the dark hours, like centuries changing a watch. You should sleep, he told her the second night, finding her at the front window at 3 a.m. So should you. One of us has to watch. Then let it be both of us, Evelyn said, and let us watch together, and let me stop pretending I can lie in that bed while a killer decides how to reach me. She pulled a second chair to the window. I spent years alone in the dark being afraid, Colt. Do you know what's better than a bolt on the door, a person in the chair beside you? She sat. Even if neither of us sleeps, especially if neither of us sleeps. And so they watched together, and somewhere in the small hours, without meaning to, Evelyn's head came to rest against Colt Maddox's shoulder, and he did not move, did not shift, did not turn it into anything at all, just held still as a fence post and let her weight settle against him and let her sleep, the only real sleep she'd had in days, upright in a chair by a window with a rifle in her husband's lap. He was awake to see the sun come up. She woke up to find a blanket over her that had not been there when she closed her eyes. Neither of them spoke of it. Both of them carried it the whole rest of the day like a coal in the pocket. The blow came on the second day, and it came exactly where Colt had left himself open, not at Evelyn at all, but at the wall he'd built around her. A rider came up the track near noon, and it was young Peterson, Anna's boy, riding bareback and breathless, and Evelyn was at the rail with the rifle before he'd reined in. Mrs. Maddox, Mr. Maddox, the boy gulped air. It's the judge, Judge Morrison. They're saying he stopped stricken. They're saying he fell. On his stairs this morning, they found him at the bottom. The world tilted. Evelyn's hand closed white on the rail. Stairs are treacherous at his age. Vane had said it to her face, mild as milk, in her own yard, and now the old man who'd kept a 6-year ledger, the only judge who'd stand against Vane's money, the man who'd married them and could swear the marriage real. Is he dead? Colt said. His voice had gone to that low iron place. No, sir. The boy shook his head fast. No, sir. That's the thing, he ain't dead. Broke his arm and cracked his head, and he's a bed at Doc Ferris's, but he's alive. And he's spitting mad, and he's telling anyone that'll listen he didn't fall, says he was pushed, says a man was in his house before dawn and shoved him down his own stairs and expected him to die of it. Young Peterson's eyes were wide. The old judge is too ornery to die on schedule, my ma says. But Doc says he can't hold court, not with a broke arm and his head the way it is, not for weeks. And there it was. Vane's move revealed at last, and it was beautiful in its cruelty. He hadn't needed to kill the judge. He'd only needed to break him. A judge who couldn't hold court was as good as a dead one for Vane's purposes, and better because a live judge nursing a broken arm didn't make the town angry the way a corpse would. He'll bring in another judge, Evelyn said, the pieces falling fast now. A circuit judge, his judge, one he owns. He breaks Morrison, delays the hearing, and by the time court sits again, it's a man on the bench who already owes Vane his appointment. She turned to Colt, and the drowning fear was rising, and she fought it. He didn't need to kill me. He just needed to take away the one honest judge and replace him with a bought one. And then the judge annuls the marriage or throws out my testimony or finds some paper reason to hand me back all legal, all in the daylight exactly like you wanted, except the daylight's his now. Colt Maddox stood very still. Then we go see Morrison, he said, right now, before Vane's circuit judge is even saddled. Because a broke arm don't stop a man from talking, and there's things I need to ask that old buzzard while he's still got breath and spleen enough to answer. Judge Morrison was propped up in Doc Ferris's back room with his arm in a sling and a purple knot on his temple and a look on his face that would have curdled milk. Don't, he growled when Evelyn started toward him with sympathy in her face. Don't you go soft-eyed on me, girl. I'm too mad to be pitied. 40 years on that bench, and I finally get shoved down my own stairs by a man too much a coward to do it in daylight. He winced, shifting. Should have bought a single-story house. Sarah always said. He stopped. His eyes flicked to Colt. Beg pardon, my late wife. Heads rattled. Judge. Colt pulled a chair close. The circuit judge. Vane's gonna push for one. How's it work? Governor appoints him, but the local nominations carry weight. And Vane's had a circuit man in his pocket, 2 years now, Judge Pruitt out of Fort Worth. Smooth as butter and crooked as a dog's hind leg. Morrison spat the name. Pruitt'll rule the marriage a fraud inside an hour, throw out the girl's testimony as hearsay and hysteria, and have her back in Vane's custody by supper, and every step of it'll be legal enough that nobody can say a word. The old judge's good hand curled into a fist. That's the game, Maddox. He's not fighting the law, he's renting it. Then we need our own judge faster than he gets his, Evelyn said. There's no such thing as your own judge, girl. That's the whole... No. Evelyn leaned in and something in her voice made the old man stop. Not a bought judge, an honest one. Vane's got Pruitt because Pruitt's crooked. But surely in the whole of Texas there's one circuit judge his money never reached. One man he couldn't buy. You've kept a ledger 6 years, Judge. You know which men on which benches came up clean when Vane came calling. You must. A man who writes down which papers smell wrong, writes down which judges wouldn't sign them. Judge Morrison stared at her, then slowly, painfully, with his one good arm, he reached under his pillow. He'd had them bring the strongbox. Of course he had the ornery old buzzard, and drew out the battered ledger and set it on his lap. There's one, he said quietly. One man, Judge Amos Thorne, rode circuit up in the Panhandle for 30 years. Vane tried to buy him back in '79 the water rights business, and Thorne not only wouldn't take it, he wrote it down and he sent Vane's lawyer out of his courtroom with the flat of his boot. A grim ghost of a smile. It's the only entry in this whole book where Vane lost. Thorne's the reason I started keeping the ledger at all. Figured if one man could stand, maybe writing it down would help the next one. Where is he now? Colt said. Retired, 2 years back. Lives up near Wichita Falls. Morrison's face fell. Which is a hard 3 days ride, Maddox, and a retired judge can't hold court anyhow. He's got no... Can he be appointed? Evelyn cut in. Special. For one hearing. If the county petitions, Morrison went still. A county can petition the governor for a special judge, he said slowly, when the sitting judge is incapacitated. He touched his broken arm and barked a laugh, which I surely am. And the governor's more like to grant a petition that comes with a fat stack of citizen signatures than one that comes from one rich man's lawyer. If this whole county signed a petition asking for Amos Thorne by name before Vane's got Pruitt's paperwork through, the old man's eyes lit with a dangerous fire. That'd be a race, and Vane's got money, but a petition's got feet. Every neighbor Colt unbought, every soul on that street who cheered a drunk who wouldn't sell, those are signatures, Maddox. That's the fort you built, and now it can sign its name. Evelyn felt the whole shape of it click into place. Then that's the race, she said. Vane's money against our petition, his bought judge against an honest one, and it comes down to which paper reaches the governor first. She looked at Colt. How fast can this county sign its name? Colt Maddox was already reaching for his hat. Fast as I can ride to every door in it, he said, and I know every door in it. They split the county between them, Colt and Mo, and Evelyn Ifo and Dutch and young Peterson, riding a spoke, each carrying the petition Morrison dictated from his sickbed in a hand made shaky by the broken arm, but firm in its fury. And at every door the story was the same they had heard about the judge's fall. They'd been on the boardwalk when Dutch tore up Vane's paper. They'd sat at their own kitchen tables while a bruised girl told them the truth with her own mouth, and they signed. Anna Peterson signed and made her husband sign, and her 2 grown sons besides. Widow Pearl signed and got every boarder in her house to sign. Old Mrs. Locklear couldn't write and signed her mark and cried doing it and told Evelyn about a niece back in Tennessee who'd married a man with soft hands and kind eyes and never wrote home again. By the end of the second day of writing, the petition ran to 4 pages and near 200 names. And that was when Vane's patience finally entirely ran out. They came at night at the ranch while Colt was still out on the last of his writing, and only Evelyn and Dutch were home, and that was no accident. Evelyn understood at once. They'd watched, they'd waited for the night the husband was gone. The dog started barking, and then the mouse stopped barking all at once, mid-note, and the silence where the barking had been was the most terrifying sound Evelyn had ever heard. Dutch. She had the rifle already. The dog. Dutch came awake in the corner where he'd been dozing, saw her face, and was on his feet with the second rifle in his hand, sober Dutch. Free Dutch, a different man than the one who'd signed a license drunk 2 weeks past. How many? He whispered. I don't know. Get away from the window. The voice came not Vane's this time, a rougher voice, one of the hired men. Mrs. Maddox, we got no quarrel with you. Just come on out and this stays easy. Mr. Vane's got a coach waiting. You come quiet. Nobody at this ranch gets hurt. You make us come in, a pause. Well, your man ain't home to stop us, is he? And Evelyn Maddox, alone in the dark, with one free drunk and 2 rifles and a killed dog in the yard, felt the whole weight of her old life come crashing down on her. Every man who'd ever decided her body was theirs to move. Every night she'd lain awake waiting for a door to open. This was the moment she'd feared her whole life. The men had come. The husband was gone. The dark was full of hands. And she discovered in that moment that she was not the woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach. Dutch, she said low and steady, and her hands were not shaking. Back door, quiet. You slip out, you ride hard, you find Colt on the North Road, and you tell him what's happening here. Don't you dare stay to be brave. You're the witness. You alive and talking is worth more than you dead and loyal. Go. I ain't leaving you. You're not leaving me. You're fetching the wall. Her eyes stayed on the window. I built this fort with my own mouth, Dutch door by door and name by name. It's my turn to hold it a few minutes till it comes running. Now go and go quiet and don't look back. Dutch went, and Evelyn Maddox turned to face the dark alone, and she called out through the door in a voice that did not shake, that carried clear and cold across the yard to the men who'd come to take her. You tell Bartholomew Vane something for me. She thumbed the rifle's hammer back, and the click of it was loud in the black. You tell him 200 people in this county signing their names to a paper today, and every one of them knows my whole story, and every one of them knows he threatened the judge with a fall down the stairs before the judge fell down the stairs. You tell him I'm not a secret anymore. I'm the loudest thing in Texas. Her voice rose. So you can drag me out of this house tonight? You're 3 men, and I'm 1 woman. You'll do it if you're willing to bleed for it. But the second you do, you've murdered the one person keeping this whole county from riding on Vane with torches. Killing me quiet was his plan. Taking me loud in front of a county that already knows why, that doesn't save him. That hangs him. So you go on and come in. But you best be real sure Mr. Vane understands what it costs him. Because I don't think he told you. I don't think he tells his hired men anything that might make them think twice. Silence in the yard. Long, long silence. And Evelyn understood, holding her breath behind the door with the rifle steady, that she was doing to Vane's men exactly what Colt had done to the whole town. She was unbuying them right here in the dark, showing them the price of the thing they'd been paid to do. Showing them they'd been sent to hang for a rich man's problem while the rich man sat safe in a fine rented house. She's bluffing, one voice muttered, but it didn't sound sure. 200 names, said another, and that one sounded a good deal less sure. He didn't say nothing about no 200 names. He said grab a runaway wife. He didn't say murder the only witness in front of a county that's already mad. Shut up, both of you. But the crack was there. Evelyn could hear it. The exact crack that had opened in Dutch on that porch. The moment a bought man remembers he's the one who'll swing, not the man who bought him. And then far off on the North Road, faint and then louder hoofbeats. More than one horse. Coming hard. Dutch had found the wall, and the wall was coming home at a gallop. That'll be my husband, Evelyn called through the door, and now for the first time she let them hear the fierce edge of something almost like joy. And he's not alone by the sound, so you boys have got about 1 minute to decide whether Bartholomew Vane's money is worth what's riding up that road. I'd choose quick if I were you, and I'd choose to be gone. She heard them curse. She heard them argue. She heard over it all the thunder of horses growing Colt and Dutch, and by the sound of it 2 or 3 of the Peterson men that Dutch must have raised on the way the fort come alive and armed and furious. And Bartholomew Vane's hired men did the arithmetic. At last, the arithmetic Vane had never let them see, and they broke and ran for their horses and were gone into the dark before Colt Maddox came pounding into his own yard with a rifle in his hand and murder in his face, and Dutch and 3 neighbors hard behind him. Colt was off his horse before it stopped. He hit the door. Evelyn, she opened it. She was standing in the middle of the front room with the rifle lowered now, and the hammer eased down safe, and her face was wet, though her hands were steady, and she looked at her husband filling the doorway, with terror and fury written all over him. Terror for her, she understood this Iron Man undone by fear for her sake, and Evelyn Maddox did the last thing either of them expected. She crossed the room and put both arms around him and held on. Not braced, not flinching, not a woman submitting to a man's embrace and waiting for it to turn. She held him the way you hold something you've decided all the way down that you are not going to lose. And Colt Maddox, after one frozen heartbeat, dropped the rifle to the floor and wrapped both arms around his wife and held her back just as hard, his face buried in her hair. Both of them shaking, neither of them saying a single word because there were no words yet made for it. "They killed the dog," she finally said into his chest. "I'll get you 100 dogs. I don't want 100 dogs, I want—" Her voice broke and she let it. She didn't fight it. She'd spent 21 years never letting her voice break in front of a man, and she was done. "I stood in the dark, and I wasn't afraid, Colt. They came. The men finally came, the thing I've dreaded my whole life, and I stood in the door and I wasn't afraid. You did that. You in this town and that fool Ledger and a drunk who wouldn't sell." She pulled back to look at him. He meant to. "You didn't save me tonight. Dutch fetched you, but you didn't ride in and save me. I saved myself." And that, the tears came harder, and they were not, she said, that was the strangest thing. They were not sad at all. "That's the thing you gave me that no man ever did. Not rescue, thaw. You gave me back the woman who could stand in her own door." Colt Maddox looked down at his wife. This woman he'd married as a wall, and somewhere along the way had come to... He didn't finish the thought. He wasn't ready, neither was she. But he cupped her wet face in his rough, scarred hands, careful as a man handling something that had cost the whole world to make. And he pressed his forehead to hers, and they stood like that, a long moment in the ruined quiet of the night, while the neighbors waited in the yard and pretended not to watch, and the dead dog lay in the dark, and 200 signatures sat drying on a table. And 40 miles away in a fine rented house, Bartholomew Vane received his 3 hired men, white-faced and empty-handed, and listened to their stammered account of a woman who wouldn't be taken, and a county that wouldn't be crossed, and he did not rage and he did not shout. He simply sat very still and steepled his soft hands and understood at last that patience had failed him, and money was failing him, and the law itself was about to be pulled out from under him by 200 farmers with a petition, which left for a man like Bartholomew Vane only one road he had not yet traveled, the road where he stopped sending other men to do it, and did the thing himself. The petition reached the governor's desk on a Thursday, carried by young Peterson on the fastest horse in the county, and Vane's paperwork for Judge Pruitt reached it the same afternoon, and for 3 days nobody in Dust River knew which had won the race, and Evelyn thought the not knowing would drive her mad. Then the answer came by wire, and Widow Pearl herself rode out to the ranch to bring it, waving the yellow slip over her head before she'd even reined in. "Thorne," the old woman hollered. "The governor granted Thorne, Amos Thorne, special appointment 1 hearing to sit the week's end. 200 names beat one rich man's lawyer, Evelyn. Your fort held." Evelyn read the wire 3 times before she believed it. An honest judge, coming to Dust River, to hear her testimony in the daylight, with the whole county watching, and no way for Vane's money to reach the bench. "We won," she said, and then because she'd learned to distrust the word "we" won the race, "we haven't won the hearing." "No," Colt agreed, reading over her shoulder, "but we get to fight it fair now. That's all I ever wanted for you, a fair fight. You've never had one in your life." He looked at her. 4 days, Evelyn. 4 days, and you stand up in that courtroom and you tell it. Can you do it? Evelyn thought of Cornelia, Margaret, Adelaide inked out of a Bible. 3 women who never got a fair fight. "I've been getting ready to say these words my whole life," she said. "I just didn't know there'd ever be a room that had to listen." But Bartholomew Vane had done his own arithmetic, and Vane had seen before any of them what the granting of Judge Thorne truly meant. It meant the law was lost to him, a bought judge he could have used, an honest one with 200 witnesses and a live testimony, and Morrison's 6-year ledger was a machine that would grind him to powder in the daylight. Vane had spent his whole life making sure no honest court ever heard the words Evelyn was about to say, and now one was coming appointed and armored against his money, and there was not enough gold in Texas to stop it. Which left the thing Vane had never once in all his years had to do with his own 2 soft hands. He came the night before the hearing, alone. No hired men this time. Vane had learned that lesson on Colt's dark porch, learned that bought men do arithmetic. This was a thing that could not be bought, done a thing with too high a price for any hireling to carry, and so Bartholomew Vane, who had always made others cross the river for him, saddled his own horse, and rode out to do the last cruelty himself. He did not come at the house. He was cleverer than that. He came at the 1 hour Colt was certain to be away from it. The hearing was set for the county seat, a half-day's ride, and the whole household had planned to go together at first light. But in the black hours before dawn, Colt woke to Dutch shaking his shoulder, frantic. The north pasture's afire. Somebody fired the grass. Colt, the wind's pushing it at the barn, and the stock. And Colt Maddock, rancher to the bone, was up and pulling on his boots before he was fully awake, because a grass fire in a dry season would take the barn and the horse and everything he'd built, and there was no time to think, only to move. He was halfway out the door when he stopped. He stood in the doorway with one boot on and the smell of smoke in his nose, and the whole instinct of his life screaming at him to run to the fire, and some colder, older part of him, the part that had learned Vane's methods over 3 hard weeks, went very still and very quiet and said, "Why now? Why the night before the hearing? Why the one fire that pulls the husband to the far side of the property in the dark?" "Dutch," Colt said slowly. "Who saw the fire first?" Dutch stopped. "I smelled the smoke. Come from the north. I didn't see nobody. The dog's dead." Colt's blood had gone to ice water. "We've got no dog to bark, and a fire in the north pulls me north." He turned and grabbed Dutch by both shoulders. "It's not for the barn. The barn's the bait. He's coming for her, and he lit the far side of the ranch so I'd run the wrong way." He was already moving back into the house. "You fight the fire, wake the neighbors, they're camped in the yard for the ride. Get them on it. I'm going nowhere near that barn." Evelyn. But Evelyn's room was empty. The bolt he'd built with his own hands, the bolt only she could work, was drawn back. The window stood open, and on the sill, weighted under a smooth river stone, was a single folded page in a fine cultured hand, and Colt's whole world stopped when he read it. "Mr. Maddox, your wife has gone with me of her own accord to spare your ranch and your neighbors any further unpleasantness. She understood at last that this was the only way to end it without blood. Do not follow. If you come after us, she dies, and it will be your doing, not mine. You'll have chased her off a cliff, so to speak. Sit by your fire, Mr. Maddox. You are good at that, BV. Of her own accord." The lie was so exactly shaped to gut him that for a moment Colt could not breathe. "You'll sit by your fire. You're good at that." Vane had reached down 6 years into the worst night of Colt's life and turned the knife because Vane knew somehow he knew about Sarah and the river and the man who couldn't cross, and that was Vane's whole mistake laid bare in his own fine hand. Because Colt Maddox read, "Sit by your fire, you're good at that," and the grief that Vane meant to paralyze him with turned instead to something white and absolute, and Colt understood with perfect clarity that there was not a force on this earth that would make him sit by a fire while a woman he didn't finish the thought. He'd been not finishing it for 3 weeks. There was no more time to not finish it. Dutch. He was already saddling the fastest horse. Vane's got her took her out the window while the fire pulled us north. He's got maybe 20 minutes start. Which road to the county seat, Dutch? Which road would a Fort Worth man take? The river road's faster, but it fords the Brazos. The river, of course it was the river. Colt Maddox swung into the saddle, and for one instant, the whole terrible symmetry of it hung before him, a man riding through the dark to reach a woman, before the river took her the exact night he'd failed 6 years gone, and then he put his heels to the horse and became at last the man he'd spent 6 years wishing he'd been. Evelyn had not gone of her own accord, and Vane knew she hadn't, and that was the thing about Vane. She'd finally fully understood he lied even when the truth would serve him better, because the lying was the point, the laying was how he made you doubt your own name. He'd come through the window with a pistol and a cloth soaked in something sweet, and she'd fought God, she'd bitten and clawed, and near got the rifle before the cloth came down. But he was bigger, and he was ready, and the sweet cloth had taken the fight out of her limbs while leaving her mind horribly awake. And now she was on a horse in front of him, bound at the wrists, her legs half numb, riding through the dark toward the river, with Bartholomew Vane's arm around her waist like a lover's. "You'll forgive the theatrics," Vane said pleasantly close to her ear. "The fire the note. I find it's cleaner if the husband blames himself. Grief makes men useless. He'll spend a week deciding whether to chase us, and by then..." She felt him shrug. Well, by then the river will have done its work, and there'll be a tragic drowning, a young bride who fell from her horse at the ford, and a widower too broken to ask hard questions. It's how these things are done, Evelyn. It's how they've always been done. Adelaide? Evelyn said. Her tongue was thick from the cloth, but the word came clear. That was Adelaide's story. The river accident. Back east. She felt him go still against her back. You do know, he murmured. I wondered how much. The Bible was it. I should have burned that Bible. Cornelia's weak heart, Margaret's 4 steps, Adelaide's river. Evelyn's voice was steady, and she made it stay steady because she had learned in 3 weeks that steadiness was a blade, and she meant to use every blade she had. You've got a story for each of them, and now I'm to be the girl who fell from her horse at the ford. You're not even original, Bartholomew. 3 dead women, and you're still just drowning them one way or another. Be quiet. You're going to kill me the same tired way you killed a woman 10 years ago because you never once had an original idea in your life. You just have money, and money lets you be lazy. It lets you buy the marshals and the fathers and the doctors who wrote the death certificates, and you never had to be clever. Bartholomew, you just had to be rich. Be quiet. And there it was at last, the thing under the pleasant mask. His voice cracked. Actually cracked, the smooth Fort Worth polish splitting to show the ugly, frightened thing beneath. And Evelyn felt a savage joy because she'd found it. She'd found the place where Bartholomew Vane was not patient at all. That's it, she breathed. That's the sound Cornelia heard. And Margaret. And Adelaide right at the end. When the mask came off and they saw there was nothing behind it but a scared little man who has to kill women because he can't bear one of them to walk away and prove he's nothing. Vane wrenched the horse to a stop. They were at the river. He dragged her down off the horse, and the sweetness in her limbs was wearing thin now, feeling coming back in pins and needles, and she made herself go limp. Made herself seem more helpless than she was, because that was a blade too. Let the wolf think the prey was already broken. You want to know the truth, Evelyn? Vane hauled her toward the water's edge by her bound wrists, and his voice had gone high and fast and wrong. I did mean to marry you, genuinely. You were the finest of them, the spirit, the fire. I thought perhaps this one I'll keep. But then you ran and you talked and you turned a whole county against me. And now his grip crushed her wrist. Now you've made it, so I can't even let you live because you know too much, and you'll never stop talking, will you? You'll never once in your life have the good sense to be quiet. No, Evelyn said, I won't. And she stopped going limp. She'd been waiting for the water's edge for the moment his footing went soft in the mud. For the instant, a patient man finally let his patience go, and she drove her bound hands up into his throat with everything. 3 weeks of standing up had put back into her body, and Bartholomew Vane staggered, and his soft, rich feet slipped in the river mud, and he went down hard on one knee with a cry of pure astonishment. That sound again, that same astonished sound from the porch, the sound of a man who has never once been told no. And Evelyn ran. She ran along the dark bank with her wrists still bound, ran the way she'd run from her father's house, ran the way she should have gotten to run her whole life. And behind her, Vane was up and cursing and crashing after her, and he had the pistol. She heard him cock it, and she knew she could not outrun a bullet, and she did the only thing left. She turned at the water's edge and faced him, because she was done running from men. She decided that in a doorway with a rifle 2 nights past, and she was not going to undecide it now. Go on then, she said, chest heaving, wrists bleeding. Shoot me on a riverbank with 200 names already signed, and a judge already writing in, and every soul in that county already knowing my whole story and yours. Shoot me, Bartholomew, and find out if a dead witness is louder than a live one. I already know the answer. I've been the answer 3 dead women needed. So pull the trigger and make me the loudest ghost in Texas. And Bartholomew Vane stood on the dark riverbank with the pistol leveled at her heart, and his hands shook, and for one long, terrible moment, Evelyn Maddox looked deathful in its ordinary, pleasant, frightened face, and hoofbeats came thundering out of the dark. Vane spun toward the sound pistol swinging, and Colt Maddox came off his horse at a dead gallop and hit Bartholomew Vane like the whole weight of 6 years of grief made flesh. They went down together at the water's edge, and the pistol fired once into the sky, And then Colt Maddox's fist came down and came down again, and Evelyn watched the quiet, steady rancher, who'd made himself no taller than her at a kitchen table, become for one terrible minute a force of pure reckoning. Every blow for a woman Vane had drowned, every blow for the river. Colt couldn't cross 6 years gone. Every blow for the fire and the note and the words, "You're good at sitting by your fire." "Colt," Evelyn's voice cutting through. "Colt Didico, don't." He stopped, fist raised, Vane's face a ruin beneath him, both men soaked and gasping in the mud. "Don't kill them," Evelyn said, and she came and knelt beside her husband in the wet her bound hands on his raised arm. "Not because he doesn't deserve it. He does. But because if you kill him, it's over quiet in the dark at a river, and that's his ending, Colt. That's how he did all of them. Quiet, in the dark, where nobody sees." She held his arm, and her voice broken and held. "Don't give him a dark riverbank. Give him a courtroom. Give him the daylight. Give him 200 people watching while I say every name out loud. Let him die the way he feared most, not shot but known. Let me put him in the ground with the truth, Colt, not your fists. That's the only ending that saves those 3 women. Please." And Colt Maddox knelt in the river mud with his fist raised over the man who tried to take everything. And he looked at his wife, her wrist bound and bleeding, her face fierce and wet and unafraid. And slowly, slowly he lowered his hand. "You're a better soul than me," he said hoarsely. "No," Evelyn said. "I've just spent longer learning that the loudest revenge is the truth said in the daylight." She almost smiled. "Now untie me, husband, and let's drag this drowning man to a courtroom." Team. Judge Amos Thorne was a lean, white-haired man with eyes like a hawk and no more patience for money than a stone has for water. And when Bartholomew Vane was brought before him, soaked, beaten, bound, no longer smiling, the old judge looked at him the way a man looks at something he's waited 30 years to see caught. "I sent your lawyer out of my court on the toe of my boot in 79, Mr. Vane," Judge Thorne said. "I've often wondered what became of you. Sit down, we're going to find out together." And then Evelyn Maddox took the stand. She did not perform. She'd learned that from Colt in a farm wife's kitchen weeks ago. A liar performs. You just tell the truth, like it cost you. So she told it plain. She told the packed courtroom, and it was packed. The whole county had come. Anna Peterson and Widow Pearl and old Mrs. Locklear and Dutch Harrison in the front row, and Judge Morrison propped in a chair with his arms still in its sling and his ledger open on his lap. She told them all of it. Cornelia Ashford dead, 23 of a strong heart. Margaret Coyle dead on 4 steps. Adelaide inked out of a Bible, drowned in a river 10 years and 1,000 miles away. The debts cleared, the families silenced, the fathers paid, the doctors bought. She laid Bartholomew Vane's whole method out in the daylight, name by name, and Judge Morrison's ledger backed every word with dates and dollars. And when Vane's lawyer rose to call it hearsay and hysteria, Judge Amos Thorne looked at him over his hawk's eyes and said, "Sit down, sir, before I find you in contempt for insulting the only living witnesses 3 dead women ever had." The lawyer sat down, and Bartholomew Vane, who had spent his whole life making certain no honest court ever heard these words, sat in a Texas courtroom in the full light of day, and heard them, everyone said, by a woman he could not buy, could not frighten, could not drown, and could not silence. It took the jury 40 minutes. They convicted him of the attempted murder of Evelyn Maddox, which 200 people had signed statements toward, and the assault on Judge Morrison, which the old man testified to himself from his chair, and the deaths of Cornelia and Margaret and Adelaide, which no jury in Texas could yet prove to a hanging, those Judge Thorne sent with the Morrison's ledger and Evelyn's sworn testimony up the line to Fort Worth, and beyond 3 cold cases pried open at last by the one witness who got away. Bartholomew Vane did not smile when they let him out. The pleasant mask was gone for good, and what was left was exactly what Evelyn had named on the riverbank, a small, frightened man who'd needed money to be a monster, and without it was nothing at all. He looked at her once on his way out in chains. Evelyn Maddox looked back and did not flinch and did not gloat and said nothing, because she understood at last that a woman who no longer needs to answer a man is a woman he never truly owned. He was the one who looked away. They rode home in the evening, the 2 of them along the road that was neither the fast one nor the river one, but the long, slow way, because for the first time in 3 weeks, there was no reason to hurry anywhere. "It's over," Evelyn said. She kept saying it, testing it the way you test ice you're not sure will hold. It's really over. It's over. He's not coming back. There's no wire on the wires with my name. There's no reward. There's no man in a good coat. She looked at her wrists, healing now, the rope marks fading. I've been running 14 days and then 3 weeks and then my whole life, and now there's just nowhere I have to run to. I don't know what a person does with that. Colt was quiet a while, the horses walking easy. Anything she wants, he said finally. That's what a free person does. Anything at all, and nobody's owed a word of it. Evelyn looked at him. And here at last was the thing they'd both been not finishing for 3 weeks, and there was no more danger to hide it behind, no more wall to call. And no more urgency to blame it on just a man and a woman on a slow road in the evening, married by a soft-cornered Bible, and forged into something real by fire. Colt, she said, when I married you, it was for a wall. You know that. It was survival, and you were the decent man who offered shelter, and I took it because I trusted your decency, not because She stopped, started again, and made herself say it because she'd learned that the truest yes is the one that costs you. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being a wall, and I need you to know that I know the difference. Because you gave me back the right to choose, you said it that first day you were free to leave, and I don't want you ever thinking I stayed because I had no wall to leave for. She reined her horse to a stop and made him stop too, and looked him full in the face. I'm choosing you, not the shelter, not the safety, you freely. Of my own accord, the real kind, not the kind Vane wrote in a note. The first fully free choice of my whole life, and I'm spending it on the man who taught me I had choices to spend. Colt Maddox sat his horse in the evening light and looked at his wife, and this time he finished the thought. Out loud. I love you, Evelyn, he said, plain and rough and certain, a man who did not waste words, spending the truest one he had. I think I started somewhere around the moment you took the second rifle off the pegs and told me you were done hiding behind walls. Maybe before, I don't rightly know. I only know I stopped trying to figure out when a good while back. He reached across the space between the horses and took her hand, not to hold her, just to hold it the way he'd offered a handshake at a wedding weeks ago, an equal reaching for an equal. And I need you to know this, so we're square. I didn't cross that river tonight to save you. You'd already saved yourself, had Vane on his knees in the mud when I got there, same as you held that door 2 nights past. I crossed it because I couldn't stand to live in a world with you on the far bank and me on this one. His voice went thick. 6 years I couldn't cross a river for a woman I loved. Tonight I'd have crossed 100. That's what you gave me, Evelyn. You didn't need saving. You gave a broken man back the nerve to try. And Evelyn Maddox, who had stepped off a stagecoach 3 weeks ago, with fear in her eyes and a scar on her wrist, and no belief left in the decency of any man alive, leaned across the space between 2 horses and kissed her husband of her own accord. The first kiss she had ever given in her life that no one had bargained for or arranged or paid for or demanded. She gave it freely because she was free and because she chose to. The ranch, when they came to it, was still standing. The neighbors had beaten the grass fire back before it reached the barn, and there were still a dozen of them in the yard when Colt and Evelyn rode in tired and smoke-stained, and grinning Dutch Harrison chief among them, a free man in his shirt sleeves who'd sooner die poor than live owned. They stayed on that ranch, Colt and Evelyn Maddox, through that spring and every spring after. She never did become a woman who flinched at a raised hand that took a while, but it went the way the rope marks went, the way the fear went. Worn away by 10,000 ordinary mornings of a man who thanked her for the coffee and never once reached for her without her reaching first. She worked the land beside him, astride skirts be damned, and she learned every fence and every head of stock, and she signed her own name in the mercantile ledger. And she slept, God. She slept whole nights unbroken behind a bolt. She stopped needing to draw because she'd finally learned the difference between a door you lock from fear and a door you simply close because the day is done. And on the wall of that house, framed where any visitor could see it, hung a single yellowed page, 200 names, a whole county's worth, signed to a petition that once outran a rich man's money to the governor's desk. Evelyn hung it there herself. When strangers asked, she told them, plain, that's the day I learned a truth spoken in the daylight is louder than any lie a man can buy. And that's the day I stopped being anybody's fourth wife and started being my own first anything. She had come west to escape death. She had found instead the one thing three dead women never got, and she had nearly missed herself. Not a rescuer, not an owner, not a wall, but a man decent enough to hand her back her own life and patient enough to wait while she learned to live it and brave enough in the end to cross the river, not to save her, but simply to stand on her side of it. Evelyn Maddox was never afraid again. Not because the world had no more wolves in it, it always would, but because she had learned in a dust-blown Texas town standing in her own doorway, with a rifle in her steady hands, the one truth no man could ever take from her again, that the woman who knows she is free to leave is the only woman truly free to stay. And she stayed, by her own accord, to the end of her long, unfrightened, freely chosen days.